Sweetheart, you scared me, Sarah gasped. Emma's eyes were wide, serious. Don't go up there. Sarah crouched. Why not? The lady doesn't want you to. Sarah's breath hitched. What lady? The one who watches me at night? The words hung in the air like smoke. Before Sarah could reply, David's voice bellowed from outside, breaking the moment. Sarah, can you bring me the toolbox? When she looked back, Emma was already padding away toward the living room. That night, the scratching returned. It woke Sarah around 2 a.m., a slow, deliberate sound from within the walls. She sat up, heart pounding. David was asleep. Emma, in the middle, whimpered in her dreams. The scratching grew louder. Closer, Sarah swung her legs from the bed, feet touching the cold floorboards. The sound seemed to follow her as she moved toward the door. She opened it slowly. The hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by the nightlight they'd plugged in. At the far end, the attic door loomed. The scratching was coming from behind it. Her mouth went dry. She took a step forward, and then another. The sound stopped. Silence. She stood there, trembling, staring at the attic door, and then thud. Something heavy hit the floor on the other side of the door. Sarah's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping, before slamming the bedroom door shut again. David stirred, grumbling. What the hell are you doing? Sarah's voice shook. There's something in the attic. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. It's an old house. Animals get in, probably raccoons. I'll check tomorrow. But Sarah lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the door, listening. The scratching never returned. The next morning, David pulled down the attic ladder. With a groan, dust rained down. See? Probably just squirrels. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly as she watched him climb. Minutes passed. Silence. Then David called down, voice oddly tight. Sarah, you might want to see this. Her stomach dropped. She climbed carefully, her free hand clutching the rung, until her head cleared the attic floor. Dust swirled in the pale light from a single window. The space was cluttered with old trunks, broken furniture, rotting boxes, and in the center of the floor, a circle, drawn in chalk, faded but unmistakable. Strange symbols lined its edges. Inside, a blackened stain spread across the wood, as if something had burned there long ago. Sarah's breath caught. David frowned. Probably kids messing around. Satanic panic stuff. Teenagers. But Sarah shook her head slowly. This house had been empty since her grandmother's death. No teenagers. No kids. The circle had been here all along, and something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. That evening, Sarah sat with Emma while David watched TV in the next room. Emma was unusually quiet. Coloring dots, Sarah finally asked softly, Sweetheart, about the lady you saw. Can you tell me more about her? Emma's crayon stilled. She didn't look up. She has black hair, Emma whispered. It covers her face. Her dress is all red, and her feet don't touch the floor. Sarah's blood ran cold. Emma's small hand trembled as she drew a figure on the page, a stick woman, dress scribbled red, hair black and wild. She comes from the attic, Emma said. Sarah's hand shook as she reached out to turn the page over, hiding the drawing. That night, when the house finally settled into uneasy silence, Sarah lay awake once again, and sometime after midnight, she heard it, voice soft, female, right by her ear. You shouldn't have come back, Sarah gasped, sitting upright, clutching her chest. The room was dark. Still, but, in the corner, by the wardrobe, a figure stood, for one terrible heartbeat. Sarah saw her black hair hiding her face, dress soaked dark as though dripping. Then, the figure melted into shadow. Sarah's scream tore through the house. The scream still echoed in Sarah's ears. As David flipped on the lamp, his face pale and furious. Jesus Christ, Sarah, what the hell is wrong with you? Sarah clutched the quilt to her chest, staring wide at the wardrobe. The corner was empty now. Nothing but shadows. I saw her, she whispered, her voice trembling. She was here, right there. David's jaw tightened. He rubbed his face with both hands. You're exhausted. You've been running on no sleep for days. That's all this is. Sarah shook her head violently. No, she was real. Black hair, red dress. I swear to you, a small voice interrupted from the bed. She was here. Both parents turned. Emma was sitting up, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her lap. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was calm. She stood right there. She was watching us. Sarah's blood turned to ice. David swallowed hard, looking between them. Enough, both of you. This is ridiculous. It's in your heads. He switched off the lamp with a sharp flick and lay back down. We'll talk about this in the morning. But Sarah lay awake for hours, holding Emma against her. She knew what she had seen, and now Emma had confirmed it. Whatever haunted this house wasn't just in her imagination. The next morning, the house felt colder, though the day was warm outside. The air carried a faint metallic temps, like rust or blood. Sarah made breakfast, while David busied himself with chores, determined to ignore the tension that had seeped into every corner. Emma barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on something Sarah couldn't see. What are you looking at, honey? Sarah asked gently. Emma's lips parted, but no sound came. She only lifted her hand and pointed toward the empty hallway. Sarah followed her gaze. Shadows clung there, unnaturally thicker than they should have been in morning light. When Sarah blinked, they were gone. By noon, David insisted on taking a walk through town. Maybe seeing civilization will help you both calm down, he said. Red Hollow isn't haunted. It's just old, creepy, but not haunted. Sarah didn't argue. She wanted to see the town again anyway, to remind herself it was real, not just a nightmare in the woods. They drove down the cracked main street. Red Hollow was smaller than Sarah remembered, or maybe just emptier. Many storefronts were boarded up. The gas station was still there, though only one pump worked. A faded diner with a rusting Coca-Cola sign stood across from it. People stared as they passed. Not curious stares, hostile ones. By the time they parked in front of the diner, Sarah's skin crawled. She felt the eyes on them even after they went inside. The diner smelled of grease and old coffee. A handful of locals sat at the counter, silent as they entered. The waitress, a gray-haired woman with deep lines around her mouth, approached warily. What'll it be? David ordered burgers for himself and Sarah, grilled cheese for Emma. The waitress scribbled, but her eyes lingered on Sarah. You're a Whitfield, she said finally. Sarah froze. Yes, my grandmother was Margaret Whitfield. The woman's mouth tightened. Didn't think we'd see one of you back here. David frowned. What's that supposed to mean? But the waitress only turned away. From the counter, one of the old men muttered, Bad idea, bringing a child here. Sarah's stomach twisted. When their food came, it was barely touched. The weight of unspoken words pressed down on them until David finally threw some bills on the table and ushered them out. On the way back to the farmhouse, Emma whispered from the back seat, They don't like us. Because of her. Sarah glanced in the mirror. Because of who, sweetheart? Emma's gaze was distant. The lady in the red dress. That evening, Sarah unpacked more boxes in the kitchen. She found old letters bundled with string, yellowed with age. Most were ordinary shopping lists, family updates. But one envelope had no stamp, no address. Just her grandmother's name. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. You can't keep her out. She wants the child. She will always want the child. Get out while you can. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. Behind her, something rattled. The shoe, the old blood-stained shoe, had fallen from the counter onto the floor, but she hadn't touched it. That night, David refused to hear any more. We're not leaving, Sarah. We've been here 2 days. You're tired. Emma's spooked, but we're not running off because of creaky floors and shadows. That's final. Sarah didn't argue. She knew it was pointless. But when the house settled into silence again, she sat awake, holding Emma's hand. Sometime past 1 a.m., she felt Emma's small fingers twitching in hers. She turned, expecting to see her daughter dreaming, but Emma's eyes were open, wide, blank, and she was whispering. Sarah leaned close, heart in her throat. The words were soft, but clear. Blood for blood. She wants the child. She always wants the child. Sarah's stomach dropped. Emma, she whispered. Emma blinked slowly, as if waking from a trance. Mommy. Tears burned Sarah's eyes. She pulled Emma close, rocking her, but she couldn't stop hearing the words. Blood for blood. The following day, Sarah returned to the family cemetery alone. The air was thick, humid. Clouds gathered above, muting the sun. She walked among the stones, searching. Most were too weathered to read, but near the back, half hidden by weeds, she found one that chilled her to the bone. The inscription read, Clara Whitfield, 1956, 1964, beloved daughter, a child's grave, 8 years old. Sarah's breath hitched. She had never heard of Clara. Her father had never mentioned a sister. But the shoe, the size, the stains, it had belonged to Clara, and Clara had died here, in Red Hollow. That night, the storm broke. Rain hammered the farmhouse. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. Sarah sat awake, staring at the wardrobe. When she heard it, laughter, high-pitched, childlike, coming from inside the wardrobe. The doors rattled, as though something pressed against them. From within, Sarah scrambled back, clutching Emma, who whimpered in her sleep. The doors burst open. The wardrobe was empty, but the laughter lingered, and for a split second, Sarah saw her, a little girl in a tattered dress, eyes black as coal, mouth stretched in a grin too wide. Then she was gone. Sarah sobbed, holding Emma tighter. The storm raged on, and in the attic above, something heavy began to drag across the floorboards. The storm lingered into morning, leaving the world gray and sodden. Water dripped steadily from the eaves as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. She hadn't slept. David shuffled in, yawning, rubbing the back of his neck. "You look like hell." Sarah didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the blood-stained shoe still sitting on the counter. Finally, she whispered, "There was a girl, Clara, buried in the family plot." David frowned. "What are you talking about? My father had a sister. She died when she was 8. No one ever told me." Sarah's voice trembled, and Emma saw her last night. David groaned, pouring himself coffee. "Jesus, Sarah, not this again. You're scaring yourself. You're scaring Emma. Just stop." But his voice lacked conviction. He looked as tired as she felt. "David." Sarah's eyes burned into his. "Something is happening here. Something tied to my family. You can feel it, even if you won't admit it." He didn't answer. From the living room came a soft sound, humming. They both turned. Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, her rabbit clutched in her lap. She was humming a tune Sarah didn't recognize, high and sweet, but her eyes were closed, and her lips were moving in words that weren't the tune at all. Sarah crept closer, straining to hear. "She comes in red. She comes for blood. She comes for me." Her stomach twisted. Emma's eyes snapped open. They were black. For one horrifying second, her daughter's eyes were bottomless pits, reflecting nothing. Then she blinked, and they were blue again. "Mommy," she said softly, as if waking. Sarah scooped her up, holding her tight, her heart pounding. David stood frozen in the doorway, his coffee cup shaking in his hand. That afternoon, Sarah couldn't bear the house anymore. She bundled Emma into the car and drove back into town. David trailing reluctantly behind. The diner was nearly empty this time. The same waitress eyed them warily, but said nothing as they sat. After a long silence, Sarah leaned across the table. "What happened here?" she whispered. "Why don't you want us here?" The waitress's face stiffened. An old man at the counter answered instead. His voice was gravelly, cracked with age. "Because Whitfields bring the blood." Sarah turned. "What does that mean?" He looked at her with milky eyes. "You think you're the first to see her? You think you're the first she's whispered to? Your people brought her here, and she never left." The waitress hissed, "Shut up, Frank." But Frank only shook his head. She was a girl. Wrong family, wrong time. They didn't want her, so they gave her to the woods. But the woods gave her back. Sarah's skin crawled. Who was she? The waitress slammed a coffee pot onto the counter, glaring at Frank. "That's enough. Don't fill her head with old ghost stories." Frank laughed bitterly. "Ghost? That thing ain't no ghost. Ghosts move on. She don't." Sarah left the diner shaking, Emma clinging tight to her hand. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah couldn't shake the words. They gave her to the woods, but the woods gave her back. That night, the house was unnaturally quiet. No creaks, no scratching, just silence, heavy and suffocating. Sarah lay awake, every muscle tense. She felt watched. Around 2 a.m., the silence broke. A thump from above the attic. Sarah's pulse spiked. She shook David awake. "It's happening again," he groaned. "I'll prove it to you." Before she could stop him, he threw back the covers and marched into the hall. He yanked the attic cord. The ladder creaked down. The smell hit them first, acrid like burnt hair and rotting meat. David gagged. God, that stench. Sarah covered her mouth, trembling. David climbed. Sarah followed, clutching a flashlight. The beam cut through the dark. The circle was still there on the floor, the symbols clearer now, as though the chalk had been freshly drawn, and in the center of the circle lay something new. A doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one eye missing. Its dress was red, soaked, and stiff as if with dried blood. Sarah's breath hitched. That wasn't here before. David knelt, picking it up. It's just a doll, old junk. But as soon as he touched it, the temperature dropped. Their breath puffed white in the air. The attic door slammed shut behind them. The flashlight flickered, and then came the sound. Laughter, high, shrill, echoing around them, though the attic was empty. Sarah clutched David's arm. "We have to go, now." The flashlight died. They were plunged into blackness. The laughter grew louder, and then a voice, sharp and close, whispered in Sarah's ear. "Give me the child," Sarah screamed. The flashlight sputtered back to life. The doll was gone. The circle's stain glistened wet, as though fresh blood pooled there. David yanked the attic door open, dragging Sarah down the ladder. They stumbled back into the hall, slamming the door behind them. Sarah was shaking uncontrollably. David's face was ashen. For the first time, he didn't deny it. "She's real," he whispered. The next day, they tried to leave. Sarah packed in a frenzy, shoving clothes and food into bags. David hauled them to the car, but when he turned the key, the engine sputtered. "Died." He tried again. Nothing. "Battery's dead." He muttered. Sarah's hand shook. "But it was fine yesterday." He slammed the steering wheel. "It doesn't matter. I'll walk into town. Get someone to tow it." But the road was blocked. They didn't see it until they reached the turn. A tree, massive and freshly fallen, sprawled across the gravel drive. David stared, chest heaving. "That wasn't here last night," Sarah whispered. "She doesn't want us to leave?" That night, Emma refused to eat. She sat at the table, staring blankly at the wall. "Sweetheart." Sarah knelt beside her. Emma turned her head slowly. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't belong to her. "She says you can't take me away." Sarah recoiled. Who says? The lady. David's fork clattered against his plate. Emma's voice deepened, distorted. She wants blood for blood. Her nose began to bleed, scarlet drops trailing down her chin. Sarah grabbed her, pressing tissues to her face, tears streaming. Emma's eyes rolled back. She whispered one last word before collapsing limp in Sarah's arms. Clara. The farmhouse felt different after Emma's collapse. Every shadow clung longer than it should. Every floorboard groaned as if under invisible feet. Sarah carried her daughter to bed, whispering soothing words, but Emma remained limp, her face pale, her lips moving silently in dreams. Sarah could not hear. David hovered at the doorway, his arms crossed tight across his chest. He looked like a man trying to hold himself together with sheer stubbornness. She needs a doctor, he muttered. We can't get to a doctor, Sarah snapped. The car won't start. The road's blocked. David's jaw flexed. Then I'll walk. Sarah turned sharply. And leave us alone here. His silence was answer enough. Sarah smoothed Emma's hair back, forcing calm into her voice. She said a name. David. Clara. That's my aunt. The one nobody talks about. She's delirious. No. Sarah stood, her eyes blazing. This is about my family. I don't know how, but it is. And if we don't find out what happened here, we're not going to survive this. That night, Sarah sat in the living room with a stack of dusty boxes she'd pulled from the cellar. Most were filled with brittle papers, old farm ledgers, photographs of long-dead relatives. But one box was different. Inside lay a journal, its leather cover warped and stained. Across the front, written in a child's shaky hand, Clara Whitfield, 1949. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it. The entries began innocently childish scrawls about animals, games in the woods, chores. But halfway through, the tone shifted. They don't want me here. Mother cries at night. Father says I'm cursed. I hear them whisper. They say I should not have been born, that I am not right, that the woods want me back. Sarah swallowed hard, turning pages. Last night they brought me into the woods. They dug a hole. They said it was for a game, but I know it was not. The entry ended there. The next page was smeared with something dark, almost like blood, obscuring the words. Sarah slammed the journal shut, bile rising in her throat. Behind her, the floor creaked. She spun. Emma stood in the hallway. Her eyes were open, but her expression was blank. Sweetheart, Sarah whispered. Emma stepped forward, her voice small but certain. She says they put her under the big tree. Sarah's breath caught. What tree? Emma tilted her head, as though listening to someone Sarah couldn't see. The one with the roots like claws. Then she turned and walked back to bed. Sarah spent the next morning searching. She trudged through the sodden fields, scanning the tree line, her boots sinking into the mud. At the edge of the property stood a massive oak, its gnarled roots twisting above ground like skeletal fingers clawing at the earth. Sarah froze. The roots formed the shape of a cradle. She felt suddenly sick, dizzy. Kneeling, she brushed away leaves and dirt. Something white jutted up from beneath the roots. Bone. Her hands shook violently as she uncovered more. A child's rib cage, a skull, small and delicate, cracked through the temple. Sarah staggered back, choking on air. The woods gave her back. Clara had never left. That evening, Sarah confronted David. She's buried under the oak, she said, her voice breaking. My family, they killed her. They buried her there. David stared, horrified. Jesus Christ. Sarah held up the journal with shaking hands. She's not just haunting this place. She's bound here. And Emma, her voice cracked. She wants Emma. David ran his hands through his hair. This is insane. You're telling me some ghost wants our daughter because of something that happened 70 years ago? Yes, Sarah cried. That's exactly what I'm saying. The lights flickered. Both froze. The house groaned. A low, drawn-out creak, as though the beams themselves were screaming. Emma shrieked from upstairs. They bolted up the stairs. Bursting into her room, Emma hovered 3 feet above her bed, her hair splayed, her limbs rigid. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with inky blackness. Sarah screamed, rushing forward. The moment she touched Emma, a shock blasted through her, cold, violent, burning her bones. She saw visions, Clara screaming, hands shoving her into dirt, soil filling her mouth, muffled cries in the dark. Sarah collapsed. Gasping, Emma dropped onto the bed with a thud, unconscious. David dragged Sarah back, shaking. What the hell just happened? What the fuck just happened? Sarah sobbed, clutching her chest. She's inside her. Clara's inside Emma. That night, Sarah dreamed of the woods. She stood at the base of the oak, the roots writhing like living things. From the soil, pale arms reached out, clawing upward, fingernails torn and bloody. A little girl emerged. Clara thought her face was half bone, half flesh, her mouth stretching too wide. She pointed at Sarah, blood for blood. Sarah woke, screaming. Beside her, David sat upright, his face pale. He'd had the same dream. The following day, David broke. "I can't do this," he muttered, pacing the kitchen. "We can't fight this. We take Emma. We go. Road or no road, we walk." Sarah shook her head violently. "She won't let us leave. You saw what happened when we tried." "I don't care," David roared. "We'll die if we stay." Emma entered the room silently, her feet bare on the cold floor. Her voice was not her own. "You'll die either way." They both spun. Emma's head tilted at an unnatural angle, her smile stretched too wide. "She wants the blood that was promised, and she will have it." The lights exploded. Glass rained down. David grabbed Sarah, dragging her toward the door, but the farmhouse shuddered violently, its frame groaning, walls cracking. The front door slammed itself shut with a boom that shook the whole house. Emma stood perfectly still in the center of the room, her eyes voids, and then every cabinet, every drawer in the kitchen burst open at once, knives and forks flying through the air like arrows. David threw himself over Sarah as blades clattered into the walls, the table, the ceiling. When it stopped, silence returned. Emma swayed, then collapsed to the floor. Sarah crawled to her, cradling her limp body. David knelt beside them, his voice hollow. "We can't fight this. We need help." Sarah's eyes were wild. Who the hell could help us against this?" David swallowed. "The old man at the diner. He knew. He's the only one who knew." Sarah clutched Emma tighter. They had no choice. The drive back to town was silent. The truck rattled along the dirt road, headlights cutting thin lines through the mist. Sarah sat in the back with Emma cradled in her lap, the girl's face pale, her breathing shallow. Every so often, Emma twitched, her lips moving soundlessly, as though carrying on a conversation with someone Sarah couldn't hear. David's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Neither dared speak. The diner appeared, through the fog like a ghost, neon sign flickering weakly. One lone truck parked outside. Frank was there. He was always there. The bell above the door jingled when they entered. Frank sat in his usual booth, a steaming mug of black coffee in front of him. His roomy eyes lifted as they walked in, and for the first time Sarah thought she saw something other than indifference. Resignation. "You came back," he rasped. David strode over, slamming his palms on the table. You knew what was happening back at that farm, and you didn't say a damn thing." Frank's gaze flicked to Emma in Sarah's arms. His lips tightened. "I told you not to stay there," he said quietly. "That was warning enough." Sarah's voice trembled with fury. "Our daughter is dying. Whatever's happening to her, you're going to tell us how to stop it." For a long moment, Frank just stared at them. Then he sighed and gestured for them to sit. "The Whitfield place," he began, his voice low, isn't just some old farmhouse. It's the root of everything that went wrong in Ashwood. He took a long sip of coffee, then leaned in. Back in the late 1940s, the Whitfields were one of the wealthiest families in the county. Strict, religious, ruthless. They had one daughter, Clara. She was a quiet child, odd. Some said touched by the devil. Others said she was just different, too sensitive, too curious. Sarah's hands clenched tight around Emma. One day, Clara started talking about a woman in the woods. Said she heard her singing, whispering promises. Folks didn't pay it much mind at first. Kids make up stories, you know. But then animals started turning up dead. Cows split open, dogs found hanging from trees. And Clara knew things she couldn't possibly know. Frank's eyes darkened. Her parents thought she was possessed. So they took her into the woods, to that oak tree, and they buried her alive, thinking it would rid them of the evil. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. I found her bones, she whispered. Frank nodded slowly. Aye, you would have. But here's the thing, they didn't bury her alone. David frowned. What do you mean? Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. They made a pact. The Whitfields and half the town. They thought if they gave the woods blood, innocent blood, it would keep the rest of them safe. Bad harvests would turn good. Sickness would vanish. The town would thrive. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee, and it worked for a time. But Clara's spirit didn't move on. It lingered, hungry, angry. Every generation since, she's taken her due, always from the Whitfield line. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. Emma, she whispered. She's after Emma because she's mine. Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. David slammed his fist on the table. Then how do we stop it? Frank looked at him with eyes heavy as stone. You can't. The word landed like a hammer. Sarah's voice cracked. There has to be a way. There has to be. Frank glanced at Emma, who stirred faintly, whispering in her sleep. Some folks say, if you give Clara what she was denied, justice, acknowledgement, she might rest. But others, he shook his head. Others say she'll only be satisfied when the Whitfield line is gone. Every last drop of blood returned to the soil. David's face drained of color. That's not an option. Frank's gaze hardened. Then you'd best prepare yourselves, because she won't stop, not until she has what she wants. They left the diner in silence. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the truck like a shroud. Sarah buckled Emma in, her hands trembling. David stood for a moment beside the truck, staring out into the mist. She's just a ghost, he said finally. Ghosts can't hurt us. We'll find a priest, someone who knows how to banish this kind of thing. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked conviction. Sarah closed her eyes. Clara wasn't just a ghost. She was a wound that had never healed, a scream buried alive that had never stopped echoing, and Emma was caught in her grip. That night, back at the farmhouse, Sarah dreamed again. This time she stood inside the oak itself, hollow and vast like a cathedral. Its walls were made of flesh and bark, pulsing with veins of sap that looked disturbingly like blood. In the center stood Clara. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was tall, skeletal, her eyes hollow pits, her mouth split too wide. She cradled Emma in her arms. She is mine, Clara whispered, her voice echoing like 1,000 screams layered together. Blood for blood. Sarah lunged forward, but the roots coiled around her ankles, dragging her down into the soil. Dirt filled her mouth, her lungs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. She woke choking, clawing at her throat. Beside her, David sat upright, gasping, eyes wide with terror. He'd had the same dream. The house was colder than ever. Frost crept along the windows, though it was late summer. Every shadow seemed alive, every silence too heavy. Emma's condition worsened. She refused food, her skin growing translucent, veins dark against her flesh. She spoke less and less, except when her voice shifted into that hollow, echoing tone that wasn't hers. One evening, as Sarah tried to coax her to eat, Emma's eyes snapped open, black as night. "Mother," she said, though the voice was Clara's, "you know how to end this." Sarah's breath caught. "Tell me." Emma's lips curled in a grotesque smile. "Bury the child alive, as they buried me." Sarah staggered back, her stomach twisting. David rushed in, pulling Sarah away, his face ashen. "Don't listen to her," he hissed. But Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Clara didn't just want Emma, she wanted Sarah to make the same choice her ancestors had made, to bury her own blood in the soil. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, Clara's journal spread before her. She traced the faded letters with trembling fingers. "They said I was cursed. They said I would ruin them. They buried me in the dark. But I am still here. I will always be here." Sarah whispered to the empty kitchen, "What do you want from me?" The lights flickered. From the hallway came the faint sound of a child's laughter. Emma's laughter. But layered beneath it was another voice. Clara's, single quotes. As the night after Emma spoke with Clara's voice, silence weighed heavier than ever in the farmhouse. Sarah sat awake in the kitchen, the journal open in front of her. Her fingers traced every word, though she knew them by heart now. The handwriting grew more frantic the closer it neared the end, as if Clara's fear had spilled into the ink. David was pacing, muttering to himself, "We leave tomorrow. We pack up and get the hell out. She can't follow us if we're not here." Sarah looked up, her voice hoarse. "Frank said she's tied to me, to the blood. I don't think distance matters." David stopped, his jaw tight. "We can't just sit here and let her take Emma." As if summoned by her name, a sharp bang echoed upstairs. Sarah shot to her feet. They bolted up the staircase together, hearts pounding. Emma's bedroom door was shut, though they'd left it cracked. Something scratched from the inside, long, slow drags like fingernails against wood. David threw the door open. Emma sat cross-legged on the bed, her hair hanging in front of her face. The room was ice cold, her breath visible in the dark. On the wall opposite her bed, words had been carved deep into the plaster. "She is mine." The carving was still fresh. Dust crumbled down the wall. Emma looked up, her eyes black. "She doesn't want you anymore." "Mommy," she whispered in Clara's voice. "She only wants me." Then she smiled, and her teeth were wrong. Too many, too sharp. Sarah stumbled backward. David scooped Emma up, though she kicked and writhed with unnatural strength. He held her tight against his chest, muttering, "We're leaving now." The truck roared to life. Fog clung to the road, swallowing the beams of the headlights. Emma had gone limp in the back seat, her face pale, lips moving silently, as though she were speaking to someone Sarah couldn't hear. Sarah kept her eyes on her daughter, willing her to fight, to stay present, but the farther they drove, the thicker the fog became. The road seemed to loop, familiar landmarks repeating, a crooked fence, a toppled scarecrow, the same dead oak on the right side of the road again and again. David's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "No, no, this can't be." Sarah's voice was a whisper. "She won't let us leave." The truck shuddered, the engine sputtering as if drowning in the mist. David slammed the gas, but the headlights flickered and died. They rolled to a stop in total darkness. From the fog outside came the sound of children singing. Sarah's blood ran cold. It was a nursery rhyme, old off-key "Ring round the rosy," pocket full of posies. Emma sat up suddenly, her eyes snapping open. She pressed her face to the window and whispered, "They're here." Shapes emerged from the fog. At first they looked like children, small, slight, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, but their faces were blurred, features shifting like smoke. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, though the song kept playing, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. One by one, they pressed their hands to the truck, leaving streaks of black soot. The vehicle groaned under their touch, metal warping. David fumbled for the ignition, twisting the key desperately. The engine coughed, then roared to life again. He slammed his foot down. The truck lurched forward, straight through the children. Their forms dissolved into ash, swirling into the fog, but the singing grew louder. Now inside the cab, Sarah clutched her ears, screaming. Emma's voice rose above it, singing along. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And then the truck died. Completely. They stumbled out into the mist, the oppressive silence crushing. The children were gone, but ahead, rising from the fog, loomed a familiar silhouette. The oak tree. David cursed, slamming his fist against the truck. It doesn't matter where we go. She drags us back here every time. Sarah's chest heaved. She clutched Emma tight, whispering, "What do you want from us?" The ground trembled. Roots burst through the soil around the tree, writhing like serpents. The hollow in the trunk gaped wide, black as a mouth. A voice rolled out, deep and hollow. Blood for blood. Emma stiffened in Sarah's arms, then wrenched free with unnatural force. She bolted toward the tree, her small figure vanishing into the hollow before Sarah could stop her. "No," Sarah screamed, chasing after her. David grabbed her arm, but Sarah tore free. She has Emma. Without hesitation, she plunged into the hollow. Inside, the air was thick, choking. The walls of the oak were alive, roots pulsing, sap dripping like blood. The deeper she went, the more the space expanded, impossible and endless. Whispers slithered through the darkness. Clara's voice. "They buried me here. They buried me alive." I screamed until my throat tore, but no one came. Sarah stumbled forward, her hands raw from clawing at the living walls. "Emma," she cried. A faint glow appeared ahead. Emma, standing in a circle of roots, her face calm, her eyes black dot. Clara stood behind her, not the child Sarah had seen before, but something older, taller, skeletal. Her hair hung like seaweed, her limbs too long, her mouth split unnaturally wide. "You cannot take her," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Clara tilted her head, her hollow eyes fixing on Sarah. "She is mine. The pact must be kept. You are of Whitfield blood. You are the last. Give her to me, and the hunger will end." Sarah's voice shook. "She's my daughter. She's innocent." Clara's laugh was like breaking glass. So was I. The roots coiled tighter around Emma's legs, pulling her toward the earth. Sarah lunged forward, but Clara raised one skeletal hand. An invisible force slammed Sarah against the wall. Roots wrapped around her wrists and ankles, pinning her in place. Emma's small voice rose in the dark, but it wasn't hers anymore. "Mommy," she said sweetly. "Don't fight it. Let me go." Sarah screamed, her body straining against the roots. David's voice cut through the darkness. "No one touches my family." He burst into the hollow, swinging the heavy iron crowbar from the truck. He brought it down on the roots binding Emma, severing them. Sap sprayed like blood. Clara shrieked, the sound splitting the air. The roots convulsed, the whole hollow shaking violently. David grabbed Emma, pulling her into his arms. "Run!" Sarah tore free, the roots ripping at her skin as she stumbled forward. She grabbed David's hand, and together they fled toward the faint light at the end of the hollow. Clara's scream followed them, shaking the earth itself. "You cannot escape me." Blood for blood. They burst out of the oak, collapsing onto the damp soil. The fog swirled violently around them, the air filled with whispers and wailing. Emma sobbed in David's arms, her eyes briefly clear again. "Mommy," she whispered weakly. "She's still inside me." They staggered back to the farmhouse, broken and bleeding. Sarah cradled Emma, rocking her gently. David sat against the wall, his face pale, his hands trembling around the crowbar. They both knew the truth. They hadn't escaped. They'd only delayed the inevitable, and Clara was closer now than ever. The farmhouse no longer felt like a home. Every room breathed. The wallpaper peeled in slow, deliberate curls, like skin. The floorboards moaned beneath invisible weight. Cold drafts whispered through cracks where there had been none before. Sarah hadn't slept since they returned from the hollow. She sat in Emma's room, clutching her daughter's hand, watching her chest rise and fall with uneasy breaths. Sometimes, Emma's lips moved in silent conversation. Sarah pressed her ear close and swore she could hear another voice whispering back from inside her. Clara. David busied himself with barricades, hammering planks across windows, dragging furniture against the doors. He refused to sit still, as though movement alone could hold the darkness at bay. But deep down, they both knew that Clara was already inside. That night, the house woke up. It began with the photographs. Every framed picture on the walls, Sarah and David's wedding, Emma's first steps, smiling faces frozen in better days, warped. Their eyes bled into dark holes, mouths stretched into screams. Sarah tore them down, but behind the frames, the wallpaper had changed. Words scrawled in black across the plaster, carved deep as if by claws. She is owed. David stormed from room to room, shouting, "Show yourself, damn you. Stop hiding." The lights flickered and died, and then the voices began. Not whispers now, but clear, guttural chants rising from the walls, the floorboards, the ceiling. Blood for blood, blood for blood. The whole house shook with it. Emma sat upright in bed, her eyes black once more. She giggled softly. She says, "You're almost ready, Mummy." The kitchen grew colder than the grave. Sarah and David huddled at the table. The journal spread between them. Candlelight flickered, throwing wild shadows across the pages. Sarah's voice was flat, trembling. "It's not just a haunting. It's a ritual, a pact, sealed in blood. Clara was murdered by her own family, but she swore vengeance on all who carried Whitfield blood, and now she wants Emma." David slammed his fist on the table. "Over my dead body." Sarah looked at him, tears brimming. "That's exactly what she wants." A crash erupted upstairs. Emma's scream tore through the air. They bolted up the stairs, but the hallway stretched, impossibly long, every step pulling them farther from her door. The floor buckled and cracked, black ooze seeping from the boards. Emma's scream cut off abruptly. When they finally reached her room, the door slammed shut in their faces. David threw his weight against it, roaring, but the wood twisted like flesh, pushing him back. Sarah clawed at the handle until her nails split. On the other side, Emma's voice called sweetly, "Mommy, Daddy, come play with us." When the door finally gave way, the room beyond was not Emma's anymore. The wallpaper had rotted, peeling in strips. Mold crawled across the ceiling. The bed sagged, its frame splintered, and Emma stood in the middle, holding hands with 3 other children. They were pale, skeletal, their eyes hollow sockets. Soil clung to their skin, worms crawling from their mouths, their little heads tilted. In unison, their empty smiles stretching too wide. Sarah froze. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh God." Emma looked up, her expression serene. "These are my new friends," they said. "I have to stay." David lunged forward, reaching for her. But the children hissed, their mouths tearing wider, black smoke pouring out. They pulled Emma back, deeper into the shadows. Sarah screamed, rushing after her, but the floor gave way beneath her feet. She plunged into darkness, the world swallowing her whole. She hit cold earth hard. The breath knocked from her lungs. When she lifted her head, she was no longer in the house. Rows of gravestones stretched out around, her half buried in weeds. Moonlight spilled over broken crosses and leaning markers. A graveyard, but not just any. These names she knew. Whitfield after Whitfield, carved into the stone. Her ancestors one by one, the graves split open. Hands clawed their way out, skinless, decayed. The dead dragged themselves free, eyes glowing with black fire. Sarah scrambled back, but skeletal fingers wrapped around her ankle. She kicked and screamed, tearing herself free. A figure rose among them, taller, cloaked in shadows. Clara. Her voice was a chorus of the dead. They sacrificed me to save themselves, and now you must do the same. Bury your daughter alive, as they buried me, and the curse will end. Refuse, and I will take her soul piece by piece, until she is nothing but ash. Sarah sobbed, clutching her head. No, she's just a child. Clara stepped closer, her face a hollow mask. So was I. Sarah jerked awake on the kitchen floor, gasping, drenched in sweat. David knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders. Sarah, you blacked out. You were screaming. Her voice cracked. It wasn't a dream. She wants me to do it, David. She wants me to bury Emma alive. David's face twisted with rage. Over my dead body. But even as he spoke, Emma appeared in the doorway. Her small frame leaned against the wall, her head tilted unnaturally far to the side. In her hand, she held a handful of dirt. Mommy, she whispered. She says you'll do it. You'll put me in the ground. You'll cover me with soil, and then we'll all be free. She dropped the dirt, and it scattered across the floorboards. The chanting resumed, rattling the house. Blood for blood. Blood for blood. Sarah's heart broke with every beat, because deep down, she knew Clara was right about one thing. There would be no leaving this place, not until someone was buried, alive. The storm outside had grown wild, tearing through the valley with relentless fury. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Wind howled through the cracks, rattling every window pane. Inside, the farmhouse felt like a coffin. Sarah clutched Clara's journal to her chest, her knuckles white. Emma sat motionless in the corner, humming a tuneless lullaby, her eyes vacant, her voice not her own. David paced, gripping the shotgun he'd dug out of the cellar. His jaw was tight, eyes bloodshot. She wants a sacrifice. He spat. Fine, let her come for me. I'll end this. Sarah shook her head desperately. You don't understand. You can't kill her. She's already dead. The only thing that binds her here is the curse. It has to be broken, David snapped. And how the hell do we do that? Sarah opened the journal. The pages fluttered, as if by their own will, stopping on a section smeared with blood. Strange symbols surrounded a passage, written in a frantic scrawl. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. To sever the packed blood of the cursed must be offered in place of the innocent. One life for another, one parent for the child. David froze. No. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. David, one of us has to take her place. The lights shattered. Every bulb in the house exploded in a shower of glass. Emma stood slowly, her little hands twitching, her head turning as if pulled by unseen strings. Clara's voice poured from her throat, guttural and ancient. Choose, or I will choose for you. The walls bled. Dark streaks seeped down the plaster, forming faces that moaned in agony. The floorboards split, fingers clawing upward from the gaps. The whole house roared with the cries of the damned. David raised the shotgun, aiming at the shadows. Get the hell out of my daughter. Emma's head snapped toward him. Her smile was wide, grotesque. She's not your daughter anymore. The shotgun boomed. The blast echoed like thunder, tearing through the kitchen wall. But Emma didn't flinch. She only giggled, smoke curling from her lips. The recoil knocked David back, but before he could rise, unseen hands dragged him across the floor. He thrashed and cursed. His body scraped across splintered wood. David, Sarah screamed, lunging after him. But the house shifted again, walls bending, hallways stretching. He was ripped from her sight, pulled into the shadows. Sarah stumbled forward, heart pounding, calling his name. She found him in the parlor, pinned against the wall. His feet kicked helplessly as black tendrils coiled around his chest and throat. Clara stood before him now, not a shadow, not a half-formed blur, but fully revealed. Her face was pale, bloated with water, her hair matted with earth. Her gown was shredded, soaked in blood. Her eyes glowed like embers. She pressed a hand against David's chest, and his body convulsed. He gasped, his veins blackening beneath his skin. "Do you feel it?" she whispered, her voice like broken glass. "The rot of betrayal. The same poison your bloodline fed to me." David spat blood into her face. "You're a coward, hiding behind a child." Clara's smile stretched impossibly wide. She dug her fingers into his chest, and his scream shook the walls. Sarah rushed forward, brandishing the journal. The pages burned in her hands, glowing with crimson light. "Clara," she cried, "you don't want revenge. You want release. That's why you've been waiting. That's why you need us." Clara turned, her expression flickering rage, grief, longing. For a moment, Sarah saw her not as a monster, but as a girl betrayed by the people she trusted, murdered before she ever held her child. Clara's face softened, then hardened. "Again, then give me what was stolen. A parent's life for a child's." David's voice was raw, broken. "Sarah, don't listen to her." Sarah's hands shook. She could barely hold the journal steady. The counter-ritual burned into her mind. One parent's blood must be freely given. It had to be voluntary. Only then would Clara's hold break. She looked at David, his face twisted in pain, but still defiant. She looked at Emma, her small body swaying, her eyes empty, her heart shattered. "I'll do it," Sarah whispered. Clara's eyes flared. The shadows recoiled, hissing. David screamed, thrashing. "No, Sarah, no." Sarah stepped forward, raising the journal high. The words glowed brighter, the symbols writhing. "Take me, let Emma go." The air grew heavy, the house trembling. Clara's gaze bored into her soul. "You would give everything. You would burn in my place." Sarah's tears streamed freely. "She's my daughter. Of course I would." Clara's expression shifted again, grief twisting into hunger. "So be it." She reached for Sarah. David broke free with a roar, wrenching himself from the tendrils. Blood gushed from his chest, but his eyes burned with resolve. Before Sarah could react, he shoved her back. "I won't let you." He seized the journal from her hands, pressing it against his chest. "Take me," he screamed. "Take me instead." The pages burst into flame, the fire spreading across his body, engulfing him in searing light. Clara shrieked, her form fracturing, splintering into shards of shadow. The house shook violently, plaster cracking, beams snapping. Emma collapsed to the floor, coughing, her eyes clear for the first time in days. "Daddy," she whispered. David locked eyes with Sarah one last time. His voice was steady, resolute. "Protect her." And then the fire consumed him, swallowing his body whole. The flames surged outward, ripping through Clara's form. She screamed, her voice echoing like 1,000 lost souls. Before dissolving into ashdot, the shadows vanished. The walls stilled, the chanting died, and just like that, silence. Sarah crawled to Emma, gathering her into her arms. They sobbed together, rocking on the floor as the house groaned. David was gone, but Emma was safe. For now, the storm had broken. Morning light crawled across the valley, pale and weak, as if the sun itself feared to touch the farmhouse. The rain had stopped, but the earth was soaked, heavy with mud and blood inside. Sarah sat on the parlor floor, Emma pressed tightly against her. The smell of smoke and burned flesh lingered in the air. The boards where David had stood were scorched, black, warped, but no trace of his body remained. Just ashes. Emma stirred, her small fingers clinging to Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Sarah's throat closed. She wanted to say he was safe. She wanted to tell her daughter that everything would be okay. But her lips trembled, and nothing came out. Instead, she pulled Emma closer, rocking her gently, whispering only, "He saved us." The hours blurred. Sarah wandered the ruined house like a ghost, clutching Emma's hand. Every corner carried memories of the night before, David's scream, Clara's laughter, the flames that had swallowed everything by midday. Sarah forced herself to move. She gathered what little food and supplies she could salvage. The farmhouse, though quiet now, felt like a coffin waiting to seal shut. "We're leaving," she whispered. "We're never coming back." Emma nodded, but her eyes lingered on the shadows. As if afraid they might move again, they drove. The truck rattled down the muddy road, engine struggling, tires slipping in the muck. The trees leaned over them, dripping with rain, their branches clawing like fingers. Sarah gripped the wheel so tightly, her hands ached. Every mile felt like a battle. Every bend in the road carried the fear of what might be waiting. She checked the rearview mirror over and over, half expecting to see Clara's drowned face staring back at her. But the mirror showed only Emma, curled against the seat, silent, staring at her lap. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, gently. Emma looked up, her voice small. "Daddy said he'd always be with me." Sarah's breath caught. "Yes, baby, he will." But the way Emma said it, so certain, so calm, sent a chill down her spine. By the time they reached town, night was falling again. Sarah rented a motel room under a false name. She didn't want questions. She didn't want police. What could she possibly tell them? That her husband burned alive while banishing a century-old ghost? Emma lay in bed, already drifting to sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the soft glow of the lamp. Sarah sat at the desk, staring at David's wedding band, the only thing left of him she'd found in the ashes. She turned it over and over, her tears falling silently onto the metal. At last, exhaustion dragged her down. She curled beside Emma and closed her eyes. That night, the dreams returned. She was back in the farmhouse, standing in the nursery that had never existed. The crib sat in the corner, rocking on its own. The lullaby played slow, warped, metallic dot. Clara stood in the doorway, her face half rotted, half beautiful. "Did you think it was over?" she whispered. Sarah stumbled back. "No. David destroyed you." Clara's eyes gleamed. "He burned the vessel, not the curse." The walls bled. The crib toppled, its sheets soaked crimson. Clara stepped closer, her voice almost tender. "It passes down, Sarah, always to the daughter, always to the child." Sarah woke screaming. Emma bolted upright, frightened. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Sarah pulled her into her arms, shaking violently. Her eyes darted around the room. The shadows looked deeper, darker. The nightmare clung to her, heavy and suffocating. "It's not over," she whispered to herself. "It's not over." Days passed. Sarah tried to rebuild a life. She sold the truck, rented an apartment in a new city, and avoided every phone call, every letter from family asking about David. Emma started kindergarten. She seemed normal. She laughed sometimes. She played with dolls. She even drew pictures, stick figures of a family, Mommy, Daddy, and her. But Sarah noticed the details. Daddy's figure was always drawn in black, always surrounded by flames, and sometimes, in the corner of the page, a fourth figure appeared, a tall woman with long hair and a bleeding dress. One night, Sarah found Emma standing in the kitchen, staring into the dark. "Sweetheart." Emma turned slowly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "She visits me in my dreams, Mommy. She says she's not angry anymore." Sarah's stomach dropped. Who visits you?" Emma smiled faintly. "The lady from the house." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Clara." Emma nodded, as if the name was familiar now. "She said Daddy is with her. She said they both watch me." Sarah's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees, shaking her head violently. No, 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 no. Emma tilted her head, her eyes strangely distant. She said, "One day, I'll carry her child, and when I do, everything will finally be right." Sarah's scream ripped through the apartment, but Emma only smiled, and in that smile, for the first time, Sarah saw not her daughter, but Clara, waiting, patient, eternal.